We're in the repo as per the details in the below. I'm going to clone it, open up VS Code, and I'm going to go to open up my desktop. And I'm going to open up the folder. Create a virtual environment. And we have all our folders here. I'll go through them shortly. While we're waiting, the most important of the Docker Compose, requirements.txt, our migrations will end up being in here. That's the main YoYo aspect of this repo. So I'll just activate and I'm going to do pip install requirements. And if you notice, I've got setup tools in here. In my README, I state that I had issues that it was looking for package resources when I was running the YoYo commands. So I installed this here. We have PsychoPG binary for the Postgres, PyBox and enrich for formatting, PyTest, Python.env for environment variables, Python on Wells. We don't need, that was something I was just experimenting with, and of course YoYo migrations. So we have a YoYo INI file, and basically we just have our link to our database. For me, it's PostgreSQL. When I'm using Docker, I can use either host docker.internal or localhost. Sometimes this only works, and we'll see that in the SQL Postgres, pardon me, and let's just rename that. You can see a little. If we come back here, if we see that, for example, when I'm connecting, that was the only one that seemed to work with my Docker engine, the Docker internal. So in YoYo INI, we just place where we're going to place our migration files, and it's standard to have them in migrations. We have our database real URL, batch mode on verbosity 2. There's right standard configurations for this. So we've done all this here. So we've installed everything. First, make sure we have Docker running. It's quite easy for me to forget that. So we'll have our Docker running, and we'll see here our images and containers, they're empty. Volumes, we don't have any, so I'll just move this out of the way. So having done that, I'm going to run up Docker Compose. I've got 3 versions here. One uses a name volume, one uses a bound volume. When it's the bound volume, it will appear within the project. The name volume, as we're using, is just going to be in a name volume within Docker, so data will persist after the container shuts down. So Docker Compose here, I'm just basically using Postgres 16 Alpine. I've made all the environment variables very easy with Postgres to make sure it all works. I have storing the data in the data volume. We also have PgAdmin and the logins. We also have the adminer, and it's part of my kind of standard install for setting up Docker and Postgres. The links are in the README if you want them, but we're going to go through that now. And if we go down to the bottom of the README, you'll sort of see, open up preview, you'll see we have all the images of how to actually log in for setting up Docker Postgres PgAdmin. And I'm just going to use PgAdmin. So I'm going to go docker dash, or you can just do the space now, compose up in detach mode. Everything's starting and running. We've got our data volume, and Docker always seems to create an anonymous volume too, even though there's a name volume. Images, we've downloaded our Postgres 16 Alpine. Containers, we've got it all running here. So I already have some migrations, and we're going to delete them and start from scratch. But just to show you, if I do YoYo list, it's going to come up with all my migrations. They're all unapplied at the moment. If we do YoYo apply, it's going to run through them. YoYo list, they've now all been applied. Let's have a look at PgAdmin. So I'm going to go to my local host 5050. Using the login details, register my server. This time that's it starting up from scratch. Everything's Postgres to make it easy. Password and username, and just the name for this, I'll just call this Postgres. We'll save. There we are. Let's go down into databases. Let's go down into schemas, tables, and firstly you can see there's YoYo, keeps track of all the migrations and the versions. And there's one, a YoYo lock at the bottom. These are all the tables that we've actually installed. So that's how it is at the moment. Let's have a quick look and see how that was done. We have our migration files. And the whole root of this is we have steps of creating SQL here, and then it's quite a large one. Let me go to a smaller one. Add, say for example, if we're adding an email unique constraint, notice how it depends on the previous version. This will actually depend on that. That's the linking process. It's a bit like migrations in Django. So we add a step. That's the SQL. We're adding a constraint. Then with a comma, we then add the rollback. We've dropped the constraint. So for example, when we're in YoYo here, if I do YoYo rollback, and we do YoYo list, we see that's now unapplied. If we keep rolling back, let's do that many times, going all the way back to the beginning, and we can do it in a slightly easier way. I've got a little rollback all file here. If we now go to our database and refresh our tables, we see we just have the 4 YoYos. So that's how we've done it there. So if we come back in here, CLS, and do YoYo apply, that'll run them all. CLS, YoYo list. That's all done. And I also have a rollback file here that will do all of them. And the rollback file, basically I'm using .env, so it gets the DB from the .env file that's loaded. Oh, I think that didn't come down with the repo haul. So let's just see if this shouldn't work. Let's do Python rollback. Yeah, the connection string isn't there. So what we'll do is we just put in yoyo.ini. Let's put in this connection string here. Come back and into rollback. I forgot. I'll put db underscore URL equals let's test that now. That should work. That's got its connection string. There, that's all done. So if we do YoYo list, we'll see they're all unapplied. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually delete, in the next video, we're going to delete everything and start doing starting everything from scratch in terms of YoYo. But in this folder, you've got SQL progress. For example, here, I have some connections so that it actually connects to the database, and its host.docker.internal seemed only to work connecting to it. So for example, what I can do is I can do cd SQL, and I can do Python OO, tab it. That's going to create my publisher, and I'm going to insert many into publisher. So I'll do Python 06 and tab. Now if we come into our database and refresh, we will see we've got the publisher table. And if we get all the data, and that will persist after we close a container. So that's installed there. So in here you have a number of different CRUD operations just to make sure that everything is wired properly with the Docker installation of progress. So that's your check there. In SQL schema, we'll look at that later, but it's all the different queries to find, for example, all the primary keys, all the defaults within the table. And that's how we can do some database structural testing to check that all the primary keys, the foreign keys, everything's still in order after development work. It's just one layer of testing. What I tend to do is in steps is actually keep some of these step files just as archive so that I can reuse them. This was a long one, altering constraints. But as we say, when we come into these in the migration folder, we can see it depends on the previous version, and that's stored in the Postgres database through YoYo, so it keeps track of everything. So if you mess with things, you might not be able to actually use it because it doesn't understand things. But we can do one step, which is our SQL. Note the comma here. Then we drop all the constraints, and we can have more than one step within an array. That's up to you how you want to sort of do it, or have them individual, or have a number of different steps. But that is YoYo. So in the next video, we'll break everything apart and just play around with that.